Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Sunday Drive. I'm Sunny. I'm so glad you could join me today. I did want to start on the top of the parking garage, give a little bit different scenery, but it is currently pouring rain outside, so I don't want to get soaked any more than I have to. But before we get into the topic of today's video, there are a few updates with the car. One is the brake rotors. I would say at the end of the week, but by the time you're seeing this, I will have already filmed swapping these rotors around, so you can expect that next week, that video, whenever I get around to editing it. And also, we finally diagnosed the source of my dreaded check engine light, codes P1188, P1189. You guys can expect to see a video on that in the future. Parts are in the mail, so stay tuned for that. As usual, it was actually caused by me. I'm assuming it is, but we'll talk about that when the time comes to make that video. But without further ado, let's hop in the car and talk about 5 things that are not great about driving a manual transmission car every day. Safety first. All right, everyone. So 5 things that are not good about driving manual every day. Some of these on this list are going to be pretty obvious, but some of them I think are maybe not so obvious. So we'll start with a really obvious one. Number 1, that is going to be less ability to multitask. Obviously, in the last video, I said that manuals are more engaging, and that is true. You are more connected with the car, and you are more in control of what it's doing. But because of that, you don't have anything to do it for you. So that means you have to do everything. You want to eat and drive? Good luck. I mean, you can do it. I mean, on the highway, it's not that hard. You just, slap it in 5th gear, kind of do whatever, but when you're around town driving, you got a drink in your hand, especially in a BMW, because your cup holders are awful. That's to put it nicely. It really does become very annoying and cumbersome to have to do other things. You want to hop on the phone? Great. Now you got to hold your phone in left hand, maybe put it in your lap on speaker, hope it doesn't fall off while you're trying to drive, shift gears, right? Multitasking is very hard. So, got to reach into your glove box? And you have to change gear at the same time. You got to pick one, then do the other. You can't do them both at the same time because you gotta shift the car. You gotta drive the car. For a weekend driver, that's not really that big of a deal. But for someone like me who daily drives their manual car every day, I don't. It's not that really big of a deal, but it's definitely something that sometimes you get distracted, you're driving, you let off the clutch too soon because you're not paying attention, or you got to change gear, and then you're like, oh, and then, it's not the greatest scenario in the world. But there are definitely worse things about driving manual, which we're going to get into. So getting on to number 2 on the list, and that is going to be traffic is annoying. Again, this one's pretty obvious, but I don't think a lot of people realize why it's annoying. It is annoying to be constantly slipping your clutch, right? Like someone, you're in stop and go traffic, whatever, you gotta slip your clutch and move up 2 inches, because sometimes I'll be sitting there at a traffic light, right, and some guy will just decide to move up 2 inches, and now I have kind of a big gap, so I have to decide, do I be that BMW driver and not move, or do I slip my clutch and move up 2 or 3 inches? So you get put in that awkward scenario. But no, I actually don't like it in the types of traffic where you're constantly, I guess it happens a lot on the highway, like construction, right? Everyone's slowing down. And I don't know what it is with the gearing in this car, and I've had it happen on other manuals too. But there's this perfect speed around 10 to 15-ish miles an hour, maybe a little bit less, where it almost, first gear is too short, but second gear is too long. So I'm constantly picking between first and second gear to try to figure out where I want to be. Now, a lot of people will just leave it in first, kind of let the engine spin at 2,800, but with this gas as expensive as it is, and this is, premium octane sipper, because only the best for a BMW. But it gets kind of annoying. You're trying to, get over, right? And, you're, 2 lanes coming into one, and, construction on the highway. It really, the difference between first and second gear, you're constantly going between the two. And if I just leave it in first gear, it feels like I'm just spinning the motor too high, and then let's say I go into second, and then I'm like, oh crap, they're slowing down again, now I got to get over. It just becomes very encumbersome to drive in those types of scenarios. And something else kind of going along with that is when you're at stoplights, everyone pulls off faster than you. Every single person. Because they have a torque converter to slip, match the wheel speed and engine speed, right? You don't have that, you have a clutch. So what ends up happening is first and second gear when you're like taking off, you look like a granny. And then the people behind you get mad, they start passing you, but then as you get in like third and fourth gear, you start accelerating faster, and then you catch up to them, and it creates an odd flow of traffic. And you're kind of like the sole proprietor of doing that. I'm gonna use this guy as an example. We're about to get a green here. So we're at a stoplight, guy's next to me. I'm gonna start accelerating, right? I have to go to second. See, he passes me. I shift again into third. And now I was gonna catch up, but I gotta get over. So I was at the mercy of that guy to let me in. It's just kind of weird with like how traffic is. It doesn't happen every time, obviously, but it happens enough for me to think about it and like acknowledge it and mention that it happens. It's just kind of one of those things that once you start driving a manual every day, it's just something that you live with. So moving on to number 3 on the list, and that is going to be that no one else can drive your car. This is a good thing and a bad thing, really depending on situation and how you look at it. I don't suffer a ton from this issue because all of my friends are car people, so I'm like, hey, just drive the car. I don't feel like driving. Like I can hand the keys to them, right? Doesn't really matter. But definitely, like if I'm with my sister or mother or someone, they're not really. My mother kind of knows how to drive manual. My sister has no idea. Like I can't give them this car to drive it. Like I'm kind of stuck with it. So if you're on say like a road trip, right? You're doing all the work because it's your fault for taking your car. They can't drive it. Now, that is kind of something that a lot of people won't really care about, but I can imagine that if you get on like an 8-hour road trip and your legs start getting tired after like hour 5, not having someone that's able to drive your car could definitely get annoying. And teaching someone to stick on the spot is not ideal. Trust me, it never goes well. So if you're ever out and about with friends and you need someone to drive your car, well, you're kind of stuck because you bought it. That was your fault for buying a manual and also your fault for not teaching them how to drive your car. So such is the life of people that daily drive manuals. Now, I did want to kind of note that can be a good thing, as I mentioned in the other video, because then people won't be asking to use your car. But I think there are definitely scenarios, and I have been in scenarios where it gets a little annoying, especially if someone needs to move your car. Like in the morning, I park behind someone, I get woken up, and they're like, hey, move your car, because no one else knows how to move it. But anyway, moving on to number 4, and that is going to be that when everything is cold, and on a colder day, so like today is 65, not really that big of a deal, but let's say it was like 40 out, especially like below freezing, manuals are a lot harder to drive in my experience, especially older cars with higher mileage like this one. I mean, the Tran's a little lower, but it's got like 200k on it, right? Everything is a lot stiffer, and what I mean by stiffer is because everything's warmed up, yet a lot of your tolerances aren't where they're supposed to be. So your gears are a lot stickier. It doesn't want to slide in as well, right? Like right now it's kind of warm, like that's butter smooth. But when it's cold, it's not like that. It's very like sticky almost. You get sticky gears, doesn't want to go in, doesn't want to come out as easily. And when you're slipping the clutch is a lot stiffer because all the fluids are cold. And it definitely, when you're especially like moving around small spaces while it's cold, you have to baby it and be careful because you have the ability as a manual to just beat the piss out of your transmission when it's cold, because the torque converter isn't like doing the work for you. There's nothing there to tell you that you shouldn't be doing that. So you accidentally drop the clutch, I mean, it's your transmission, right? One time isn't going to kill it, but you do that repeatedly, right? So when it's cold, it's definitely annoying. Then especially getting onto the road, you definitely, the first 5 minutes of driving in those really cold weathers, you really got to baby it, and then you become the bane of existence for all of traffic because you're that really slow guy driving like a grandpa because your car is cold, and them and their automatic transmissions, it's not that big of a deal for them because while everything is cold in their trans too, there's a computer doing all the work for them, so they don't have to worry about babying it because they're not the one that needs to baby it, right? I do want to note with that one though, that one's a little more of a me-ism. I baby this car a lot because it has a lot of miles and I plan on keeping this car for a really long time. So I'm very conscious when it comes to those things. But it's definitely something to consider if you're driving a manual. Even on a new car, I've driven some new manuals. In the cold, everything is just a lot stickier and a lot stiffer. So it is harder to operate. And if you're not careful when it's cold, you try to just slam it in the first or reverse gear, like you might grind it a little bit. I've done that before, not in this car, but I've done that before, and every time it happens, it is just like, oh, like you feel so bad. You're just taking years off the life of your transmission. So moving on to number 5, this is going to be the last thing, and that is misshifting. So anyone who's driven a manual for a while has probably done this because, let's face it, it's not that hard to do. Misshifting as in you pick the wrong gear, or something else that can happen is you think you're in the wrong gear. So let me explain both scenarios. Misshifting as in, let's say I want to go second gear pull, top of red line, like yeah, and then I go to shift and then I hit 5th instead of 3rd. Granted, that's better than hitting 1st, but now you're at this really cool pull, you're at like 6,500, 7,000 RPM. You want to go in the 3rd and then, you know, continue the really cool pull, then you hit 5th and you hear this really loud like, woo! If you drive older BMW manuals, some of them do it, some of it don't. I've never had it happen in this car, but I've seen it happen in other cars, other older BMW manuals, some manuals in general. I don't know what that noise is, but regardless of what that noise is or whatever, you just look like a noob when you do that, because now you dropped out of the power band, and it's gonna be like a chunk, and it's gonna like move the whole car, and you're just gonna come to a stop because as soon as you do that, you go back in the full throttle right as you throw it in the 5th because you thought that you were going to be in 3rd. So, not an ideal scenario. And then obviously, if you hit 1st instead of 5th, you blow up your engine. So that's not a great scenario either. But then the other scenario, and I think this one happens a lot more commonly, is like you're in traffic and you think you're in like second gear, but you're actually in 3rd. So you go to shift from 2nd to 3rd with your hands. But then you realize that there isn't a gear there, so you kind of just push nothing into 3rd, right? And then when you do that, you then let off the clutch, but your RPM's dropped, and you didn't actually shift the gears, so then you let off the clutch, and it just right back up. Like the RPM's like they match themselves again. And then it jerks the whole car. It's just kind of not that really big of a deal, but it just doesn't really make for a smooth ride. And it's also not very good for your transmission and your clutch especially. Which again, not really the biggest deal in the world, but it happens from time to time, and every time it happens, it sucks. No one likes misshifting or forgetting what gear they're in. Something else I do sometimes too is I'll think I'm in 4th gear and I'll try to go to 5th, and then like it's already in 5th, so the same thing kind of happens. And it's just kind of one of those things. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's a little annoying. And in automatic transmission, obviously, that can't happen because, the computer's doing it all for you. I did say 5 things, but there is one honorable mention, and that is going to be on these older 5-speeds or even like older Hondas, especially like the Honda 6-speeds. Is these are at a really high RPM, like a highway speed. So we're going, let's see, about 60, and I'm sitting at like 2,600. Like that's fine. But then once you go to like 80 miles an hour, you're sitting like 3,500, and that sucks. Not really that big of a deal, but definitely once you get up there, you start chugging fuel, and you definitely feel it. My MPG between like 60 miles an hour and 80, it's like low 30s to high 20s. Like I lose like 3 or 4 miles to the gallon. Just not very cool. In newer manuals, you usually get an overdrive gear, so that isn't a problem. But with all that said, that's gonna conclude the video. I hope you guys all enjoyed this. Next Sunday, I'm thinking next Sunday or the week after, we have something really special planned that I think you guys will like. I'm definitely excited for it. But if you enjoyed the video, comment down what you think. What are some things that you guys don't like about driving manual? I'd love to hear about them. I read all your guys' comments, and I like reading them, hearing your support. Also, make sure to like, subscribe, and maybe you have a friend that's looking at a manual and he needs to hear some things that maybe he didn't consider before, so send the video to him. But with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.